This notion of international rules is very comfortable for some people to use when it suits them, but they don't believe in international rules when it doesn't suit them, because they don't apply international rules or law equally in all circumstances. So you can't say because Ukraine has been invaded that suddenly sovereignty is important, but it was never important for Palestine. It's very peculiar. If you believe in international law truly, then wherever sovereignty is infringed, it must apply. And this is the point we've been making, that we use the framework of international law unequally, depending on who is affected. And we are arguing that that must change. And one of the interesting changes that has occurred is the sudden movement, because Russia has invaded Ukraine, that we say, okay, let's not allow the Security Council to just have the veto and let it pass. We take it to the General Assembly. When some of us had been calling for the General Assembly to have a greater say, we never enjoyed support. But suddenly today, see, that's where international law begins to mean nothing. Because for some, we see it as a cheating, and for others, we see it as a benefit. So our argument is, let's revise the international multilateral system to ensure that we observe that post-1948 has arrived.
That was the South African, I believe the South African Foreign Affairs Minister or something of the sort. But whatever the case is, I must say it is not peculiar. It is not peculiar, and it is not unusual. Not unusual. Those with power, those who are privileged, have always acted like this. You know, it was some years ago, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, who was beyond his years, said that former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Percival James Patterson, PJ Patterson, he said in Parliament once, the law is not a shackle. The law is not a shackle. It is not a shackle for some, but it is a shackle for others. That has always been the case. That has always been the case. And I will talk about this at my Caribbean Thought class later this evening, my Caribbean Thought lectures at the Jamaica Theological Seminary. And of course, we will go into this talking about the issue of nationalism, the issue of self-determination, the issue of sovereignty, the issue of penetration. So it has always been the case with Haiti. Yes, it has always been the case with countries of the global south. It has always been the case. The term how we discriminate, how we make determinations based on our privileges. We will talk about this on the Neoliberal podcast as well, and in my upcoming book, Neoliberalism, Neoliberal Globalization Reconsidered. I'm Ronaldo McKenzie.
This is Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome to another episode of the Neoliberal podcast. That was the South African foreign minister speaking some time ago, and I actually happened to have captured. I got the video from George the Poet, who had retweeted it. He got it from somewhere and retweeted it. George the Poet, London's famous poet, who is actually from Ghana, and I actually listened to it, and I found it quite interesting, because this is exactly what we've been talking about and getting at, in our lectures at the Caribbean Thought, in Caribbean Thought, and what I got at in my first book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. And I continued the discussion in Neoliberalism, Book 2, Neoliberal Globalization Reconsidered. In fact, in a class this past Monday, we discussed this issue and played a video, a film entitled Life and Death, 2001 film by I think it was by Stephanie Black, a book based on written about based on called Life and Death, but it's a book written by Stephanie, based on a book written by Stephanie, based on a book written by Jamaica Kincaid about Antigua, a small place. Okay, but and this past Monday or Wednesday, at the Caribbean Thought lecture, I raised this particular video, showed this video to the class, and raised some of the issues. This past Monday, the title of the lecture was Globalization, Nationalism, and the Challenge of Jamaica's Development. Actually, it wasn't this past Monday. This particular lecture, I believe it was last week, but it speaks to the very same issue. The title of the lecture was Globalization, Nationalism, and the Challenges of Jamaica's Development, and by extension, Jamaica's, Caribbean, and the Global South development. Challenges to their development. And the lecture was entitled Globalization, Nationalism, and the Challenges of Jamaica and Caribbean Development. And I provided an insightful analysis of the impact of globalization on Jamaica and reflected on the country's current standing in the global landscape. Through an exploration of the film Life and Death, and by extension, the book Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance, and various historical and socio-political contexts, I highlight the complex interplay between globalization, nationalism, and the pursuit of sustainable development in Jamaica. On the issue of globalization and its opportunities, I acknowledged in the lecture that globalization has brought forth significant opportunities for growth, investment, and the transfer of knowledge and technology. Of course, I recognized in the lecture that Jamaica, like many other countries, has benefited from these opportunities to some extent. The influx of tourists, foreign direct investment, and access to global markets has contributed to economic development and improved living standards for some Jamaicans. The influence of international financial on the influence of international financial institutions. I also shed light on the influence of international financial institutions, particularly the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, on Jamaica's economic policies. I mentioned an ongoing IMF staff monitored program highlighting how the country is still adhering to the recommendations and conditions set by the IMF. Now, this reveals the continued impact of external forces on Jamaica's economic decision-making processes, even without direct financial assistance. And in an upcoming podcast which previews or purveys the lecture that I did now for this week, I share from a book entitled The Challenges of Structural Adjustment in the Commonwealth Caribbean, a book written by Ramesh F. Ramsaran, where he talks about the structural adjustment policy was more than a policy. Okay, but it effectively involved the transferring of decision making from countries of the global south back to the north after they had acquired their independence. Of course, we talk about that in a later class. But this, I am actually referencing a lecture that I did last week on the issue of life and death, and as it relates to what this particular foreign minister is talking about. On the issue of socioeconomic challenges. Now, I went on in the lecture last week to discuss the socioeconomic challenges faced by Jamaica, such as violent protests, higher taxes, and escalating fuel prices in the 1980s. These events reflect the grievances and frustrations of the Jamaican people, particularly those burdened by poverty. The struggles for economic stability and self-sufficiency persist, with limited resources and a small land area posing additional obstacles to progress. On the issue of nationalism and identity, I delved into the concept of nationalism and its significance in Jamaica's development, drawing attention to the juxtaposition of perspectives in the film Life and Death, where tourists are portrayed as privileged and carefree, while locals are depicted as facing struggles and violence. This contrast reflects deeper issues of identity and power dynamics between visitors and Jamaican citizens, reinforcing the need for self-determination and control over their own reality and destiny. Of course, we continued with some reflections on Jamaica's development. In contemplating the current state of Jamaica, I highlighted the disconnection between the Jamaica portrayed in Life and Death and the reality that exists today. I lamented the missed opportunities and challenges the country faced in achieving its full potential, emphasizing the importance of strategic thinking and the negotiations with global institutions, urging Jamaican policymakers to prioritize the interests of their nations and people, and to develop a stronger Caribbean community. In closing, the lecture last week, I think it was dated July 3rd, I believe, July 3rd, between July 3rd and July 5th, because we did 3 lectures, one on Monday last week and then on Thursday. But the lecture provided valuable insights into the complex dynamics of globalization, nationalism, and the challenges of Jamaica's development. It highlights both the opportunities and limitations brought about by globalization, with a particular focus on the influence of international financial institutions. Through a critical examination of Jamaica's history and socioeconomic landscape, I urge policymakers to prioritize national interests and engage in strategic negotiations to shape the country's future. As Jamaica continues its journey to sustainable development, it must strike a delicate balance between embracing global opportunities and asserting its own autonomy. And that goes for the Caribbean as well. By fostering a strong sense of nationalism, addressing socioeconomic disparities, and advocating for inclusive policies. And not only that, by having a stronger Caribbean community, we can navigate the challenges posed by globalization and shape a future that reflects the aspirations and needs of its people. Now, the lectures are available. We have several lectures in Caribbean thought and Caribbean theology available on our YouTube channel and also on podcasts at the Neoliberal Round. And of course, you can check out the Neoliberal Journals and the Neoliberal Post in the neoliberal.com and ronaldocmckenzie.com, where we provide the transcript of these lectures. And this particular article is available in those on our feeds and our websites. Of course, you can get a copy of my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, which is available here at the Neoliberal Corporation if you visit the neoliberal.com and ronaldocmckenzie.com. It's also available on eBay, PayPal. It's available at Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Target, Amazon. Wherever you just type in neoliberalism, globalization, income inequality, poverty, and resistance. In fact, it was reviewed by Kirkos as an erudite analysis of Jamaica's and the global self-economic history. I'm Ronaldo McKenzie. Continue to subscribe to us, and you can support us, donate to us, by going to anchor.fm/theneoliberal/support. Let us know how we're doing and how we can continue to grow. What good?